What's up, friends? Hector here. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to structure your BJJ training. So if you have been if you have been training jiu-jitsu for any period of time and you're looking to get into a strength and conditioning program to help with longevity, to help you to stay healthy so you can train jiu-jitsu, this video is for you. If you're coming off of an injury, if you're thinking about getting into jiu-jitsu, specifically if you're thinking about starting something like jiu-jitsu and you're over 40 years old, this is going to be a video for you, okay? So how to structure your BJJ training. First off, I want to set a foundation here and address why you should listen to me. Like, why do I have the right to talk about what I'm about to talk about? Number one, I have had the luxury, the pleasure of being able to see from both sides. I'm a strength coach on one side, but then I'm also a jiu-jitsu practitioner, however you want to label that, on the other side. So I'm a 4th degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I've got over 25 years of experience of training Jiu-Jitsu. I've competed in some of the biggest stages in Jiu-Jitsu. And I've got over 14 years experience as a strength training coach. I'm a Strong First certified senior instructor. What does that mean? Strong First is the school of strength. It is the gold standard of strength education for barbell, kettlebell, body weight training. I work closely with Pavel Satsulin. He's a gentleman that brought kettlebells to the United States around 1998, so he's my coach, my mentor, and many other highly qualified and close friends of mine that are in the Strong First systems as well have been my mentors as well. I've had the opportunity and the pleasure of teaching over 1,000 other strength training professionals to become certified kettlebell instructors. And I've led program design lectures for some of the best and brightest in the fitness industry. So I know a little bit of what I'm talking about when it comes to strength training for BJJ in particularly. Now that we've got that out of the way, I want to talk about the nature of BJJ. So you have 3 energy systems. If you're looking to start a strength training program, and if you're looking to start a strength training program in general, but particularly if you're looking to start a strength training program and you're a jiu-jitsu practitioner, it's important that you understand the 3 energy systems. So we have our alactic energy system. That is, think of that as power movements. That energy system will produce about 15 seconds of work, okay? So if you don't train jiu-jitsu, imagine getting on a track and then you run as fast as you can. You sprint at about 15 seconds, maybe a little under 15 seconds, you'll start to slow down. That's because you're no longer in your alactic or creatine phosphate system. What happens there is you shift to the next system, and that is glycolytic, the glycolysis pathway, and this is where your body begins to burn sugar for energy. This is where you start to feel the muscle burn. So if you've been training jiu-jitsu and you start to feel like your muscles burning while you're training, maybe you've been gripping or squeezing and then your muscles start burning out, you are in the glycolytic pathway. If you're strength training and you're doing kettlebell complexes or you're under tension for a period of time, you start to feel the muscle burn, you're in the glycolytic pathway. And then you have the aerobic pathway. We know this also as the oxidative pathway. This is your cardiovascular. Really quick, the glycolysis pathway, that kicks in after 15 seconds, and you can do it fairly intensely up to almost 7 minutes. Then you have the oxidative, right, or your cardiovascular pathway. This is something you can do for hours on end, right? Think of running a marathon. Think of doing jiu-jitsu, but on a very low intensity. This is where you're using more oxygen, okay? So if you understand those 3 energy systems, you're going to have a better approach to your BJJ training, like actual BJJ, and then also your strength training off the mat as well. Now, the nature of jiu-jitsu is very glycolytic in nature because you're under tension for, an average jiu-jitsu round is about 5 minutes. In competition, they range from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, depending on whether you're a white belt, blue belt, brown, purple, brown, or black belt. Some jiu-jitsu matches nowadays are like unlimited time, submission only, right? So this can go on for a long time. So you're not in the power output energy system. You're going to be somewhere between the glycolytic and the oxidative, right? The aerobic. But it's highly glycolytic. Why do I share this with you? If you're going to start a strength training program and you're doing jiu-jitsu, you don't want to choose a strength training method that is also glycolytic in nature, that creates muscle burn. Think like bodybuilding, CrossFit, those kind of methods. There's nothing inherently wrong with those. It just depends on what's the goal, what's the end outcome that I'm looking for. If you want to get better at jiu-jitsu, well, you don't want to do additional glycolytic work because you're already getting that from jiu-jitsu. What you want to focus your strength training for jiu-jitsu is you want to focus in the power output, the alactic pathway or the aerobic pathway. In Strong First, this has been coined as A&A protocols, right? Aerobic and alactic, or alactic and aerobic, right? So taking an A&A approach to your strength training, right? So it's just important. I want to set that context there. That way you understand why you would want to choose particular strategies or approaches when it comes to developing your strength training plan, okay? So now that you understand the nature of the load, the nature of BJJ, the next thing that you want to focus on when it comes to structuring your jiu-jitsu training, this is particular to actually training jiu-jitsu, is planning your mobility and flexibility. That has got to be a key staple. I talked about this in my previous video, I think it was just yesterday, where I talk about recovery accelerating mechanisms. This is a core pillar of our coaching at Hardstyle, because strength, conditioning are not mutually exclusive from mobility, health, longevity. And this is a big thing that I notice when new guys start training jiu-jitsu is, especially if you're over 40 and you've got mileage, right? We all have mileage as we get older. Maybe you have pre-existing injuries from high school or college or something like that. We have this mileage and we don't move very well. Maybe you sit at a desk for 8-10 hours a day. Your hips are going to be tight. Your shoulders are going to be tight. Your back's going to be stiff. And then you go and you start something like jiu-jitsu where you're going to be like twisted and contorted and you're moving at quick paces and you get hurt. This is a very common thing. And I've had countless conversations with guys that are over 40 who found this thing that's jiu-jitsu and they're loving it, and it's really helping them with like their mental health and their stress levels. They're getting in shape. Like everything is great, and then bang, injury. Why? Because they don't know how to move for jiu-jitsu first. So our movement system that we teach all of our students, even though not all of our students train jiu-jitsu, we do have guys that do train jiu-jitsu. But even if they don't, all of the fundamental movements that we take our students through mimic a lot of the things that you would do in jiu-jitsu. Why? Because you're on the ground, right? Jiu-jitsus are primarily ground-dominated martial art. And so knowing how to shift your hips and move and transfer weight and move athletically while you're on the floor, these are all things we need to be able to do. We need to be able to get into seated lunge patterns. We need to be able to move our ankles in both plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. We need to be able to move in all these different ranges of motion. We've got 3 planes of motion that we move in. We've got sagittal plane, which is back and forth, right? Think of like when you're jogging or you're walking, you're operating in a sagittal plane of motion. Then you've got your frontal plane of motion, so that's moving side to side. So imagine if you were to like get imagine like a diagram of me, and there was a piece of glass that cuts me from left to right. Okay, that's sagittal plane. But now imagine a piece of glass that cuts me down my head and it separates me from front to back. That is frontal plane, moving side to side, moving laterally. And then you have the transverse plane. This, imagine a piece of glass like separating my upper body from my lower body. That's called the transverse plane. And that range of motion you have seen like throwing a baseball, right? Being able to rotate through the core, being able to rotate and throw a baseball, throw a punch, throw a kick, you name it, right? A judo throw. Those are transverse movements. So if you can't operate, you sit at a desk, or you've got a history of injuries and you don't move very well because you've just been inactive, and then you go and you start something like jiu-jitsu that demands all three planes of motion as far as a competency, you're going to run into injuries. It's only a matter of when. And this is, and I did a consistency, I did a whole like 3 or 4 part, I think it was a 4-part pieces on consistency. And I talk a lot about training backwards on a micro level and on a macro level. And this is what it looks like to train backwards on a macro, right? On a big scale. On a macro level, it looks like this. If you look at, we have these 5 phases of training that we take our students through, okay? But if we look at it from like a 30,000 foot view, we've got fundamental movement patterns. Then we have general physical preparedness, so like conditioning. And then we have fundamental skills, right? So that's the top of the pyramid. So fundamental movements, that's the recovery accelerating mechanisms. That's being able to move through ranges of motion and have good mobility and movement competency and general strength, right? That's foundational. Got to have that. Then on top of that foundation, you move to functional performance, right? So you start to build your general physical preparedness. You're getting into some strength training, a little bit of conditioning work. And then the top end is high-end skill. That could be athletic training. That could be jiu-jitsu, running a marathon, like high functional motor skills. What happens is we train backwards on that macro level, and we start with the high skill. Jiu-jitsu, running, you name it, right? Name whatever competitive sport, athletic thing you're doing. We often start there. Then we try to build endurance and conditioning work on top of that high-skilled foundation. And what happens? We eventually bump into injury, and then we have to start all over and try to build a foundation, right? So we end up training backwards. And so this is why it's crucial to plan your mobility and your flexibility work first, to set a foundation of movement competency. One of my mentors, Andrea Chang, shout out to Andrea, she's one of my movement mentors. And I love the word that she uses. She uses the word movement literacy. And I love that phrase, because movement is a language too. Movement is a language. And you want to improve your movement vocabulary, right? So think of like a vocabulary. You start with your ABCs, and then you start to put those ABCs together, and you develop words. Those words develop sentences. Those sentences develop paragraphs. Just like writing, just like music, movement is a language. And you start with the ABCs, the movements, and then you start creating words. Then you start syncing movements together in sequences. What is that? What happens is as you practice that morphs into a whole entire movement language that can be applied to things like jiu-jitsu, running, whatever extracurricular activity that you enjoy doing. You now have the competency to do that thing. And you're not going to have to worry about getting injured all the time. And even if you bump into, I call them snags, like a snag in your shirt, anytime you bump into a snag, you get a little tweak here or there, you're not going to be out of commission for weeks, months, years at a time. You might be, a little sore, for a couple of days, but then you're right back on the road. We have endless success stories around our students getting completely out of pain. Whether they bump into an injury or not, they're only sore for a couple of days, and they're right back at it. Right? We have countless stories of our students seeing success with this. So having some kind of recovery mechanism in place is crucial, and understanding where you start with fundamental patterns first, learn to move for jiu-jitsu, then you can start to build conditioning work on top of that, and then you can start working on your skill training. And as you're putting this system together, you want to have some kind of test retest method. You want to have something that addresses something, some sort of like assessment. How am I moving for the day? And then at the end of the session, am I moving better? You want to have a sequence that addresses your upper body, that works on your posture. You want to have some kind of movement sequence that works on your lower body, works on opening up your hips and your ankles, so on and so forth. And then you want to have something that brings it all together, that synergizes, some kind of total body strategy. Okay, that stuff's going to help you to move well for jiu-jitsu. So that's number one, is planning your mobility and your flexibility. The second thing, and this is a big piece here, I think this is where most guys fall off, aside from the movement competency, is learning how to manage the load. What is the load? Your load can be many things. The load can be number of repetitions or number of rounds, right? Number of rounds you're rolling. It could be number of sets from a strength training perspective. It could be the weight that you're using. It could be the total tonnage lifted, right? So if you take 100 pounds, like a 100-pound deadlift, and you do 10 reps of it, you moved 1,000 pounds, right? So being able to manage the load, this is one of the core principles of designing a program, is being able to manage the load. And if you've been strength training for jiu-jitsu and you start noticing you're bumping into injuries, it's a good indicator that you have poor load management. So in the consistency series that I went through this week leading up to this video, I talked about the idea of having more constants in your training than variables. Variables are a means to an end. They are not a means in and of themselves. And unfortunately, we see this in the strength training space, in the jiu-jitsu space, is this whole idea of variety, right? The variety is the spice of life. You hear these cliches. Well, not in the strength training game, not in performance. We don't want a whole lot of variables. Why? If you have too many variables in your training, and let's say you're actually seeing fairly good results, how do you know which of the variables, since you've got all these spinning plates, how do you know which of those variables are responsible for getting you the results that you're seeing? The answer is you can't. There's no way you can pinpoint what is working. What happens with that? What is the problem? What's the effect of that? The effect is your results become unrepeatable. You can't repeat the process because you don't know which of the variables are producing the effect that you want. And so when your training is more constant, we call this the continuity of the training process. That's another one of our principles of designing a program, continuity of training. When your training is more constant, so example, the rep scheme stays the same. You're training on the exact same days. You're training the exact same time, etc., etc. When that is constant, then you can introduce one variable to see what effect it has. And if it has the effect that you like, train that until it becomes constant, and then you can add another variable. This will allow you to repeat the results that you're getting. Why do I share this? Because oftentimes when we're training jiu-jitsu, sometimes our variables are all over the place. We're training different types of rounds every day, different intensities, etc. When you approach your training, let's say you do jiu-jitsu 3 days per week, okay? If you do jiu-jitsu, or let's say you do jiu-jitsu 3 times per week, okay? And in each one of those sessions, you do 6 rounds. Like 6 5-minute rounds is pretty standard for jiu-jitsu. 3 6-minute rounds, something like that. 5. Sometimes you do 5-minute round, 5 5-minute rounds. But let's say you roll 3 times per week and you're doing 6 rounds in each session. That's 18 total rounds for the week, right? So if we do 18 total rounds for the week, that is 72 rounds for the whole month. So you want to keep your training times the same. So for instance, you say your training is at 7 p.m., okay, 7 p.m. every day. And your rounds are the same. Let's say you're keeping your rounds the same, or your efforts the same. Like you want to have as many constants as you can. The only thing I would tweak would be the volume. I would keep the days the same. I'd keep the time the same. But we would, instead of doing 6 rounds each time, we want to add a little bit of variability. This allows for longevity and allows for recovery. So instead of doing 6, 6, 6, that would be 18 rounds, we would break it up into something like 5 rounds on day 1, 6 rounds on day 2, 7 rounds on day 3. So it's like you're kind of ramping up there, but everything else stays the same. Same days, same time, same effort, etc. So if you were to take those 72 sessions, instead of doing, so if we start like at the macro level, instead of doing 18, 18, 18 every single week, we would vary that from week to week. So week 1 would be 10 rounds. Week 2 would be 16 rounds. Week 3 would be 20 rounds. And week 4 would be 26 rounds. You add all that up, and that's going to give you 72 rounds total, right? Same numbers, same end outcome, but you're able to ramp up, and then as soon as you hit that peak at the end of week 1, right? At the end of week 1, you're going to do, let's say you do 10, you could come down or you can go up, right? Just depends on, you have to use your own judgment there. And then once you've broken down, okay, I've got 10 rounds this week, you would take that and then you would divide that up into 3 training sessions. And you wouldn't do, you would vary the volume there too. So if it were 10 sessions, you could do like 3 rounds on one day or 4 rounds on one day, 6 rounds on another day, and you just train twice that week. So instead of training 3 days, you would train twice that week because the volume's fairly low. Right? We go into more detail of this. We actually designed all of our students' programming around this, so there's no thinking on your part, but I just want to give you like a bird's eye view of what all this would look like. So once you have those constants in place, the one thing you would vary would be the volume. And then once you're seeing the results, you're getting better, your conditioning's getting better, your movement competency is getting better because you're planning your mobility, your flexibility work inside there. Once those all become automated, then you could add a new variable. And the variable that I would add would be some kind of intensity change. And when I say intensity can be looked at in 2 different ways. Intensity could be, number 1, the weight that you're lifting. So if we're talking in the context of strength training, your intensity would be the weight that you're lifting. Right? One day you're using, a 24 kilo bell for presses, and then 2 days out of the month you're going to use a 32. That would be an example of intensity from a weight being lifted. But intensity could also be effort. Well, in jiu-jitsu, we're not lifting any weights. We're training with people. So you could vary effort. Well, think of effort on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being all out. I've got nothing left in the tank. I'm completely burning myself out on a training day. We all know what that, I'm sure if you've done jiu-jitsu, you've had plenty of those days. Here's the problem, is approaching your jiu-jitsu with that mentality every time. There's an actual saying in the jiu-jitsu world, it's Portuguese for porrada. Porrada means like basically all out, right? It's a slang term for like all out, nothing left in the tank. Well, if you approach your jiu-jitsu that way, we talked about doing 6 rounds, 3 times per week. If you approach your training that way every single week, injury, burnout is only a matter of when, not if. And so what you'll want to do, and imagine this from a strength training perspective. Imagine, let's say the barbell deadlift. I love deadlifting barbells. And this, you actually see this in the gym, unfortunately. People trying to max out or hit their near maximum every single session. And eventually something breaks, something pops. Now, the deadlift is one of the most neurologically taxing things that you can do. If you try to hit your near maximum multiple times per week, you'll be done. You'll be done pretty quick. Good luck making it past the first week. Now, if we wouldn't approach our deadlift training that way, why would we approach our jiu-jitsu training that way? Obviously, we're not max deadlifting, but we don't want to come up with that same effort every single week. So when designing a deadlift program, I would say, okay, I'm going to lift, between 91 and 100% weights. Let's say your deadlift is 200 pounds. That's your maximum. Let's say just for round numbers, let's say it's 200 pounds. Well, 2, maybe 3 days out of the month, I'm going to lift the 190 pounds, right? So somewhere in that 91 to 100. I'm only going to do 1 rep, and I'm going to do it 3 times throughout the month. So you're being very strategic with the intensity from a weight perspective. Now, from jiu-jitsu, you would scale it on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being all out. You would want to do that. You want to keep the majority of your training to like a 7 effort, leaving 3 reps, if you will, for in strength training terminology, 3 reps in the bank. But then you would want to strategically choose, let's say, 2 or 3 days out of the month where you're going to go all out on that one day. Maybe it's an open mat twice a month or something like that, and you're just going to go round after round and you're going to push. Then the rest of the days in between are all about recovery, but like active recovery. You're training, you're doing the drills, but you're training at like a 7 effort out of 10. If and when you approach your training this way, you're going to be able to train longer. You're going to improve your endurance. You're going to have less injuries. And most importantly, the most important thing to any jiu-jitsu player is getting better at jiu-jitsu. Because the last time that I checked, you can't get better at jiu-jitsu if you're injured and you always have to sit on the side of the mats and watch, right? And all this applies to just general strength training too, right? You don't get results if you're dinged up and you have injuries. So I hope that's helpful there. Those are two ways to structure your jiu-jitsu training. Now, if you want to know more on how to do this, if you're looking for a complete system and like the ins and outs of how to do this, I'm hosting a private live training here at the top of the hour at 7 p.m. Central Daylight Savings Time on the 5 steps to be more athletic after 40. So if you are trying to build strength, if you're trying to improve your health, flexibility, mobility, and you're over 40, just in a general physical strength training way, this is a training for you. If you are a jiu-jitsu practitioner, jiu-jitsu player, and you want to get better at jiu-jitsu and even start maybe a strength training program to aid in your jiu-jitsu training, this is a training for you. I will drop the link in the comments. Be sure to, once you register, 2 things are going to happen. Number 1, you're going to get an email confirmation from me basically saying, hey, I just want to make sure that you're registering this on your own behalf. So you'll confirm your email. What that does is it tells the Google gods of the world that I have the permission to contact you, to send you the link to the training, so on and so forth. So be sure to confirm your email. Then the second email you'll get will be the actual email with the link to join the training. When you come to the training, very important thing, don't attend on your phone. The training will be on Google Meet. Try to be on an iPad, a desktop, a laptop, something like that, so that way you can engage and fully participate. Come with a notepad, be ready to take notes. I've got a ton of really valuable information I'm going to share with you that's going to help you to finally build an athletic body, even if you're over 40, so that way you can set a better example for your kids. That way you're no longer the dad on the sideline kind of watching your kids kind of grow up because you can't really interact with them. This is a real thing. And if you want to do jiu-jitsu or if you want to do some other extracurricular activity without getting injured, this is the training for you. So that's all I got for you right now. I will drop the link in the comments. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you on the next episode. Peace.